our last session on the day, developing further on geopolitics. As China isn't a space challenger anymore, but a total comprehensive leading space power, to talk more about China's space ecosystem, I am glad to welcome on stage František Avrat, security and policy professional at CGI. A bit of biography, perhaps. You have 2 master degrees that have helped you delve into 2 regional areas: the European space security from an intelligence strategic perspective, and China's foreign policy and the Asia-Pacific studies. We'll be glad to listen to you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind invitation, and also congratulations on a successful conference. So from what I see, it's going very smoothly. So well done to the whole team. Yes. From what I saw today, and each panel actually somewhat touched on China, at least almost once. So I'm very glad that today I prepared somewhat of an overview of the Chinese system, specifically the space sector. So first I will start with the ecosystem, specifically some national strategies, domestic policies, and legal matters. Then we'll continue briefly with the organization of the space sector, so who are the main actors. Then continue with the private sector, then risks, and we'll finish off with some implications and way forward for Europe. So when it comes to the Chinese space strategy, the space strategy cannot be viewed in isolation. It is a part of a broader national strategy called the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese Nation. This is a national strategy, and the objective is that by 2049, China should be leading superpower, a modern socialist country, in the Chinese terms, economically, militarily, technologically, and politically. So in this context, space development is not an isolated ambition, but is a component of the whole Chinese broader effort to become a global rule maker rather than the rule taker. If we look at the evolution of the Chinese space program just briefly, over past 25 years, China hit the main milestones in human and robotic explorations. They are expected to conduct a crewed lunar landing in a couple of years, and to became constructing the lunar moon base by mid-2030s. Beyond the moon, China is interested in Mars as well. However, it's later on by the mid-century, as is stated in its National Space 2050 space strategy. If we look at the domestic policies that are shaping, let's say, the Chinese space ecosystem, the most important one is the military-civilian fusion. It was introduced in 2008, but then elevated in 2015 by Xi Jinping to a national strategy. So compared to the Western civilian-military fusion that you are definitely well versed with, it is not focusing on just leveraging the private sector for the military purposes. The Chinese military-civilian fusion is really focusing on to break down any barriers between the military, private sector, academia into one single, let's say, national innovation ecosystem. The goal, obviously, is to strengthen the Chinese military capabilities. It's also to reduce the dependency on the foreign technology, support the economic growth, and because of the state subsidies, for example, and to expand the Chinese geopolitical influence. So in space sector, it actually means that basically civil and military is highly interconnected. I dare to almost say the same. Another important domestic policies are the, let's say, it's a growing presence of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, within the private sector, right? So the companies, private companies, do host the CCP party units. As you can see, the number have grew steadily from 2002 to 2018, from 27 to over 50%. Today, 92% or even more of top 500 private Chinese companies do host the CCP units. Furthermore, since 2018, it became mandatory for the domestically Chinese listed companies to also host the party units. So in that sense, all of them had to amend their inner corporate structure when it comes to the decision making. Now, this further, basically what it does is that it further strengthens the top-down influence of the CCP and make sure that the, let's say, corporate decision-making aligns with the national strategy. Yeah, this button. It's not only the CCP, but it's also the People's Liberation Army, so the PLA, that is also getting embedded in the private sector. So in 2023, they start to establish so-called corporate brigades that more than 16 companies, mostly the state-owned enterprises, but also a big national private companies, has joined this initiative. The corporate brigade basically serves as an auxiliary reserve military force, but they are considered to be a single unit for that company. Why is this important? That basically in the growing domestic economic pressures that China is experiencing, as well as a growing geopolitical competition, these units can be used by the CCP to actually as a tool to provide additional control mechanisms in case of social unrests or labor strikes, if there is, for example, in case of war with Taiwan, when there would be a domestic opposition. On the legal side, the most important one is the National Intelligence Law introduced in 2017. The law establishes a legal obligation for organizations and citizens to cooperate with the Chinese intelligence authorities. So in practice, that means that the Chinese company, private or Western invested company or company in China to which a Western company invested, could potentially be required to cooperate with the Chinese intelligence authorities. These concerns also extend to the Chinese subsidiaries abroad as well as nationals living overseas. So next one, I would jump into very briefly to the organization of the space sector, the main, let's say, the key actors. So I prepared this convoluted slide. So firstly, the key point is to remember that China is a one-party state with the CCP on top, right, controlling the state and the military. When it comes to the space program, it is basically organized around these three main, let's say, governmental entities. So the first one is the Chinese Academy of Science, that primarily focuses on the scientific research, planetary science, and is directly under the State Council, which is basically a cabinet body. Next one is the China National Space Administration, which is also through some intermediaries under the State Council. The most important intermediary is the SASTINT, so that's the one with the longest name. Basically, this organization is responsible not only for science and industry, but also for strengthening the China's military capabilities through the technological development. So you have a national space administration or agency that is supposed to be mirroring, let's say, a NASA or ESA, but a direct supervisor is another government body that is responsible for the military development. And last one is the China Manned Space Agency that is responsible for the human spaceflight, for example, the Tiangong space station or future lunar missions. As you can see, it is through, again, an intermediary under the Central Military Commission. So CMC is a crucial or center organ within the Chinese state and the party that is overseeing the China's military. That means that basically any manned Chinese space mission is conducted, or you have to think that basically you are dealing with the military. So this is even more important if we, for example, think about the decommissioning of the ISS, and if there will not be any sufficient, let's say, replacement. So obviously the research organizations will want to send their experiments to the low Earth orbit. But you have to think that basically you are giving your research to the China military. Next one is the PLA Aerospace Force, very quickly established as a counterpart to the US Space Force in 2024. Here what is very important is that they do operate the launch sites and the control centers, the same ones that they are used by the civilian space sector. So again, blurring the line between the civil and military. And last important pieces of puzzle are the state-owned enterprises I already touched upon. So here I chose these two main ones, but there's dozens of them. But CASIC and CASC are basically the two main ones, let's say, holding the industrial capability and capacity of the Chinese space sector. And as you can see, they have many subsidiaries and, or other. On this slide, you can see, just for your information, an overview of the Chinese, let's say, ground installation. This is taken from the United States Defense Intelligence Agency report, which I highly recommend to read. That gives you overview not only of the holistic Chinese capabilities, but also Russia's as well. And now I would like to get to the private space sector. So China open up the space sector to the private companies in 2016, mainly because they saw the inspiration or the commercialization efforts going in the US. Obviously, they wanted to do that to bolster innovation and to keep up with the domestic demand for the launch services, especially for the smaller satellites. However, at the next slides, you kind of will see what picture I'm trying to paint, that basically a private space sector is not as private as we think. So, So the first example is a company called X-Space, established in 2016, which is a launch service provider. It was established as a CASIC subsidiary, so one of the SOEs that I've mentioned. And their task was to market the Kuaizhou launch vehicle, which is directly based on the DF-21 medium-range ballistic missile. So this example is actually to show you a classic attempt by SOE to commercialize operations through passing them onto a quasi-commercial entity, oftentimes leveraging existing military technology. Next one is EMPOSAT, also established in 2016. So the policy worked, actually, to open up the private space sector. And this is a TT&C service provider. I chose this, actually, because it became famous for two reasons. So into March 2025, EMPOSAT tried to build an antenna in Czech Republic. But this construction was banned by the government, citing the national security threats, risks, and espionage fears. This also marked the first ever prohibition of foreign direct investment in Czech Republic using our national screening law, which is only an implementation of the EU regulation. So this is also a case study to show that the EU or its member states actually do have tools in their toolboxes already existing to potentially block any malicious, let's say, or risky investments. This year, actually the previous panelists touched upon it, EMPOSAT became famous again because it was one of the two companies, Chinese companies, providing a satellite imagery to Iran to help them to guide their missile strikes in the region at the key military installations. Next one is the Space T China. Established in 2016 as well. They do manufacture the small satellites. They are working on a SAR constellation with China Electronics Technology Group, the CETC, which is also a state-owned enterprise. It's one of the biggest in China. And this actually, I chose this example to show that the private companies in China actually oftentimes count or conduct their business directly or only with the SOEs. The level of dependency obviously varies, instead of focusing on purely, let's say, market-oriented business. This company also was famous in infamous in 2023 for providing the satellite images to the Wagner Group to support their military invasion of Ukraine. So, this first part, I wanted to paint a picture that actually the ecosystem is interconnected, working toward the same goal, and it doesn't really matter whether they have the name or they have a military before it, or private company or a SOE, because the system is really highly integrated. Now I would like to get to the risks. Let's put it this way. I want to clarify that I chose only a few of them because I could talk about potential risks for hours here. So I chose the one that I thought might be the most interesting and relevant. At the same time, many of these risks are not new. I know, and me included, I think we in the space sector think that we are unique. We are not, sadly. And many of these risks have been already described or known from other technology sectors. So this actually creates an opportunity for us to learn and adapt and to save some money and a potential headache when it comes to dealing with them. So first one are the state-backed hacking groups. I think they were mentioned in the morning. So these advanced persistent threats, APTs, like Volt Typhoon, APT-41, etc., they have a dual purpose. First one is to actually to gather intelligence for the Chinese state, so identifying the vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, but also to acquire technological IP. And as I described, the system is interconnected. These do not go just to the intelligence agencies and stay there in case. No, if it is an IP, the state apparatus or the party apparatus will take that information and pass it on to the state-owned company, for example, to leverage that IP for their benefits. So F-22, F-35, C-17, all of those IPs were stolen to some degree, and China leveraged it and built their own versions using these hacking operations. Second mission is a regular for-profit. So they do steal cryptocurrency from gaming wallets, etc., because they also kind of want to make profit for themselves. What is more important one and is the Harvest Now Decrypt Later operation that China is believed to be conducting. These are basically believed that these operations are firstly aligned with the national strategy and investment of China to the quantum computing. And this means that, even though China cannot decrypt the information now, once there will be a breakthrough in the quantum computing, they will be able to decrypt the information and use them. So this is actually just today I think it was mentioned at the panel that the companies, or this is an issue of today, and the companies already should start to think about this vulnerability for the future, because even those data might be 10 years old, they can still have some risk or financial impact on the company. Next one is the scientific cooperation. So, although usually may seem harmless, China either joins a joint research operation or funds initiatives in Europe or invites the EU researchers to China. However, there are many examples that shows that basically China uses this to acquire the IP or pressures the researchers of Chinese origin, for example, to share the results with the Chinese authorities against their will. So the main, let's say, takeaway is to do a proper diligence, right? Ask your academic partners whether they have, for example, ongoing research projects with China. because it might be unintentionally, because you might be doing working on a research project at the same researcher as they do work on other 3 projects. One of them might be with China and can unintentionally share the IP with them. Also, I know that many companies will say we don't have the resources or know-how how to do the due diligence. So if you scan the QR code, actually there are tools for you, almost free of charge. It used to be for free, now it actually, they charge money. So this is a China Defense University tracker run by an Australian think tank that actually gives you an overview which Chinese universities or research organizations are having contracts or working with the Chinese military and potentially on what projects. So they are sources. I know it might seem too much, but like, you know, as the saying goes, just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean that I'm not being followed. Last one, or almost the last one, is the weaponization of capital. So this is very important, especially for the startups or the smaller companies. The Chinese entities often act as early investors in a startup, coming with a really great financial offer. However, through the investment, China might get access to sensitive technologies or influence the decision-making. Furthermore, these companies then risk a reputation or regulatory challenges, because as the security screenings within EU, NATO, or US, you know, get more and more stricter, these companies then do risk losing a potential business opportunities in the future. So next one is a traditional espionage. I chose these 2 examples. The first one is from France, actually from the beginning of this year, when 2 Chinese nationals were arrested as they set up a satellite antenna in their Airbnb, and with the intent to actually listen to the satellite communication and transfer those data to China. Same thing actually happened 2 weeks ago in Norway, so it's not happening, it's happening everywhere. Second example is from Poland, and actually it's a learning example that the state energy company Orlen banned the Chinese electric vehicles in their facilities, citing basically a security risks, because the Chinese or electric vehicle is just a camera with a big battery connected to the internet. And for example, the researchers in Norway conducted that the Chinese vehicles, 90% of data that they collected, the vehicle, was sent to service in China. So actually this is for inspiration to actually think about it. And Poland implemented it across all its facilities, for example, abroad as well, so in Czech Republic, where they have also a facility. Last one is the space-based threats. So I chose, you know, there's the classical suspects as spoofing and jamming, but also the Chinese are conducting more and more risky space operations, such as orbiting and what seems to be the refueling of their own satellites in the geo, so with a potential military implications. Also, China launched the inspection and repair systems that could function as a weapon with like a grappling arm, grabbing potentially or other satellites. They also conducted missions when they were shadowing the US satellites, or substitution exercises when military satellite, Chinese military satellite and Chinese weather satellite switched their orbits in order to confuse anyone who was watching. And as well, PLA is deploying ground-based high-power laser systems in China with the actually capability to disrupt, degrade, or damage the satellite sensors, and it's expected that by late 2020s, these weapons will have enough strength to actually damage the satellite structures. Okay, I'm good on time. So, implications and way forward. So, there are many implications and takeaway, obviously, and I chose just the most top-level ones, and we can, you know, go into Q&A or after the PPT further. But for Europe, with the growing US-China space rivalry and, let's say, worsening transatlantic relations between Europe and the US, Europe kind of risks being left behind and remain only a passenger. So in that scenario, Europe will become more of a rule taker than a rule maker, while also being excluded from future potential benefits of the new space economy, both financially and technologically or scientifically. At the same time, insufficient domestic capabilities could increase Europe's dependency on external actors, so not only China, but also the US, which, as we can see now, are not always strategically aligned with the European interests. So way forward, again, just top level one, is that Europe should really, or we should really start to think about our own interests more strategically. I'm definitely not saying that we should cooperate with and should stop cooperate with anyone, nor US, nor China, but we should be very strategic where, for example, we allow the Chinese involvement. I know this is a super old example, but like, let's think about Galileo, when firstly China was invited, and then, Americans said, but the Chinese are buying the atomic clock in the US, do you know about it? So that's, for example, one of the examples. Obviously, for the companies, they should be careful to protect their assets, technologically, technological data and IP. And lastly, and probably the most importantly, and it was mentioned on almost every panel, which I'm very glad, that Europe needs more integration rather than fragmentation, especially when it comes to space, because some member states could do the space exploration on their own, but it would take a lot of resources. So actually, it's better to do it together. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to any questions or talks post presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Avrat. Before the networking cocktail, I think we want to ask you some questions. And thank you for this presentation. It was really captivating to hear more about the military-civil fusion and how, well, difficult it can be to understand what is part of China's strategic capabilities and what is not. The lines are blurred here. We have one question from Nicola Dionisio, who asks, how does China prevent leakage of secrets with the MCF? I'm displaying the question now.
I mean, so the China benefits, or you have to understand that compared to the Western-style democracies, China is a closed system. So this gives China an inherent advantage in, information control in general, because their internet is regulated. You cannot really connect to the outside without VPN. And this same applies to the space sector and the industry as well. So this is the first layer. Second layer is that China is a totalitarian country with investing a huge amount of money into internal security, not external. So it is estimated that the internal budget for the internal security, so monitoring of its own population, is almost equal to the military budget as an external military budget. So that's a second layer. And the third layer is ideology, I'd say, that it plays a big role that, let's put it this way, last 15 years, the ideology in China starts to play a bigger role, and there have been public campaigns in a public sphere, as in TV, in the streets, on the podcasts or radio, on the internet, to promoting nationalism, and basically pushing for the Chinese dream, which is also a national strategy. So actually, there are studies comparing, let's say, optimism of the Chinese public and the Western public, and the Chinese public is much more optimistic about the future of their country and the development, which actually is tied to this, that the Chinese people in general do believe that their system actually brings them the benefits, and they do not actually have the need let's say, to defect or, let's say, leak a secret outside, as, for example, in the past we saw during the Cold War when the Soviets had it like this way. So.
And what would you say then, to close perhaps on that note, about the spirit battlefield in Europe? Because that was what you were referring to when it comes to Chinese optimism.
So it was the spirit in Europe?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too much into the politics. Let's start there. But I'd say, and it was said on previous panels as well, so Europe, of course, we are consisting of the member states, so there are ongoing differences in opinions, how space projects should be run, who should be doing them, who should be benefiting. So I'd say, I mean, I'm an optimist, so I think that the European spirit is high in general, but I think, you know, it cannot be compared with the Chinese really focused one ecosystem going forward.
Thank you very much. A warm round of applause for this closing session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.